That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So Chesterfield, copper and high-grade polymetallic exploration in Cyprus. However, we've got a new theme we're going to talk about as well today, which is growth through exploration, but also acquisition, which is a kind of new program that we've started up recently. So there are really kind of two themes to where you're going to see value growth in Chesterfield. Briefly, we listed as a shellco on the LSE on the standard main market. In 2017, we bought some assets in Cyprus in 2018. These are just the kind of areas that I'm going to run you through today. We're going to talk a little bit about the mega trend of copper that we're in, a bit about Cyprus, our geological team, and then go into our drilling of late last year, which we announced this January, and also the exploration program, which we've just commenced. And I'm going to talk a bit about Polymetal International, which joined us as a strategic partner late last year, and then also then talk about our acquisition program. Now, I know quite a few of you who've registered have seen this presentation before, so I'm going to whip through some of the slides on Cyprus and our geology there for the benefit of people that haven't seen this presentation before, but really we're going to focus on the new areas. And I think most of you, probably all of you who are watching this presentation, know about this huge mega trend of the future is electric, decarbonisation, and the rise of everything electric, which is not just electric cars and electric trains, but power, wind turbines, solar parks. They all use a lot of copper. This is a quote. I've just picked out a couple of kind of very recent quotes on this theme. Trafigura is one of the world's biggest copper traders. They probably know the copper market as well as anybody, and their CEO was saying we're going to need something like another 10 million tons of copper by 2030. To put that in context, the world currently produces around 20 million tons a year, so adding an extra 10 million tons of that is a big ask, particularly since it takes so long from making a discovery to actually starting to produce copper from a mine. It's something like 5 years. And there was a very interesting big research report out by Goldman Sachs last week. They're making the point that the copper price has got to go up quite a lot higher to stimulate the kind of increased capital expenditure to find and produce all this copper. The copper price right now is about $9,300 per ton. They're saying their 12-month target is 11,000, and then that goes up to $14,000, $15,000, 2024, 2025. So, and everybody's predicting a very robust market for the copper price. But even frankly, if the copper price stays where it is at $9,000 a ton, that's a very, very high price, and it's very good for companies like us. And we think that we're very, very well positioned as a copper exploration company. And typically what happens when you have a major transition of commodities, it's explorers that benefit. So if you think back to the age of oil and when oil was being discovered and coming into play, it was the people that discovered the big kind of oil gushers in the United States in the 1880s, 1890s, or the big oil finds in the Middle East in the 1950s. But it was explorers were the people that made the big bucks. And now we've obviously got a transition from oil to copper. And again, we believe it's the copper explorers is where you want to be, because the explorers are where the biggest gains are going to be made. And we believe we've got one of the best copper exploration companies, certainly on the junior market in London, if not globally. Very briefly about Cyprus, which is our kind of initial program. The word copper actually comes from the Latin word for Cyprus. Cuprum is very big historically. Cyprus is in the EU. It's actually a really good EU country for the UK, a UK company to be working out of, because everybody speaks English. The law's based off English common law. They even drive on the wrong side of the road like we do. Obviously got excellent power and infrastructure. And we got into Cyprus kind of quicker than everybody else. There've been a couple more Cyprus plays which have come into view on the stock market, but we kind of got there ahead of everybody else, which meant we could buy a big suite of licenses very cheaply from the government. Now, copper was, Cyprus was a very big copper producer in the sort of 1960s, 1970s. And here kind of are shots of what you see if you get away from the tourist areas and go up into the hills where we operate. There's these big old open pits everywhere. An important point to understand is that the copper was mined here from the surface. And the type of deposits that we're looking for that are common in Cyprus are called VMS deposits. And these are small, high-grade deposits. But you don't only get them on the surface, but you also get them kind of buried under the surface. And I've got a little slide here, which is actually not part of our official presentation, but kind of helps explain that, which is obviously a kind of current bun. So if you imagine this is the kind of land, and these are the small high-grade deposits which are on the surface, which they've dug out. So those are sort of the deposits on the surface which have been dug out. But in these kind of VMS camps, they're called, you always find more deposits buried under the surface. And these were deposits which they couldn't find in the 1960s and 1970s because they didn't have the technology. So this is a map of Cyprus with something like 200 little crosses here, which are sort of deposits or old slag heaps, etc. They're all in this kind of belt you can see, but these are all ones from the surface. And our exploration licenses are mainly in this area here and this area here. But the point is that underneath all these will be a lot more deposits, and that's what we're looking for. And actually, this is an example of one of those buried deposits in Cyprus. This is one they found because it was sticking out of the side of a hill. And this is probably about sort of, I'm guessing about maybe 12 meters, and that's about 40 meters of basalt, which is an ancient lava flow. So the point being is if you're kind of a geologist in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and you're walking along the lands here, you'd have no idea that this buried deposit existed. They could only find deposits which were sticking out of the surface, and that's how they went about mining them. But now we have modern technology that can kind of look through these rocks and have different types of techniques, and that's what I'm going to be talking about a little bit later on. And secondly, since the 70s, when the kind of mining really stopped due to the invasion of Turkey, the other thing that's happened is the price of gold has gone up enormously. So back in the early 70s, gold was pegged at $35 an ounce. And then that peg was released and the price of gold has gone up literally 50-fold. It's incredible to think in that time. So they were never looking for gold in that period in the 60s and 70s, but now gold is very much on our radar, and there's a lot of gold connected to these deposits. So really there are two things. One is our ability to look underneath the rocks, which they couldn't do, and then secondly to look for gold. And the question is, well, how come nobody's been doing this kind of exploration over the last 45 years? And Cyprus is a special situation. It was invaded by Turkey in 1974, and everything stopped. And actually the front line of that invasion was around the kind of mining areas where we are. Right after that invasion, the Vietnam War finished, the demand for munitions fell substantially and the price of copper fell. Then later in the sort of 80s and 90s, they started discovering these huge copper mines in Chile, in Peru, in Latin America. And meanwhile, back in Cyprus, it was still considered kind of relatively politically risky. This is the green line between what's called Greek Cyprus and the northern Turkish Cyprus. And that some explorers came in around about 2010, 2011, and they were just getting going when the kind of mining sector collapsed. This is the World Mining Index from 2011, 2016. It fell by 70%. So pretty much, a lot of exploration stopped at that time. So as a consequence, Cyprus has remained kind of unexplored for some 45 years, and that's really the opportunity we have. And in order to search for these deposits, these buried deposits, we have a really top grade geological team, far better than you'd normally expect to find in any junior exploration company. It's led by Neil O'Brien, who's our director of exploration. Neil was one of the founders of Lundin Mining, which is a very famous kind of growth story. It grew from nothing to a multi-billion dollar company. Neil's the head of exploration for Lundin. He was also head of their new business development. Dave Cliff, who's on the call with us today, was previously head of exploration Europe for Rio Tinto, one of the world's largest mining companies. Mike Parker joined us from First Quantum, another famous mining company where he was for 20 years. So this is really a top exploration team. This is our exploration acreage. We have about 100 square kilometers in the kind of western part of Cyprus, and we spent the whole of 2019 on a very intensive what we call a target development exercise. We used satellite searches, geophysics, lots of mapping, archival work to develop a big suite of licenses, something like 30 licenses in a relatively small 10K by 10K area. And we started drilling these with something called a percussion drill in early 2020, and we're about to start with our main diamond drill program when COVID hit. So everything kind of got pushed back from the spring of 2020 to later in the year. And we also used a geophysics technique, a very interesting technique called AMT. And basically, simplistically, the world is bombarded by lightning strikes all around the world, which creates a very faint charge within the Earth's crust, which is there permanently. And by reading that, by putting kind of probes into the ground, you can pick up that charge and amplify it. And that electricity moves through different rocks at different speeds. And this is a technique where we can sort of get an idea of where deposits might lie with that kind of probe. And it somewhat goes back to this previous slide. So if you imagine putting in an AMT probe in here, that would pick up that deposit under there. And here is actually just to give you an idea. This is one of the team there from Spain putting in it's called an AMT station. So they're taking their readings. This is the kind of a view of the lands, which is I think the same as the picture behind me, of our kind of acreage in Cyprus. It's kind of likely rolling hills. And as say in September, November last year, we went in with a 2,000 meter diamond program. There was a bit of a delay, unfortunately, getting the assays due to kind of COVID related issues. There was kind of a bottleneck at the labs, and they couldn't get the flights for the freight flights, etc. But we eventually got our assays back in January, and we had two pretty good results. I think it's worth noting, going back to this kind of current bun, if you imagine a drill program looking for these things, it's a bit like sticking a pin into this kind of bun. And you can stick the pin in, or the drill very close to one of these deposits, but not kind of really know it was there. So it's quite difficult to actually get into one of these deposits or on the sides of one of these deposits. But we hit twice, which we thought was a very good result for that initial run. So one intercept here was 11.6 meters, which is sort of kind of similar, as if we've hit something like that. And actually that particular intercept over 11 meters, we got 2.5 grams of copper over 11 meters, which is a really good result. And even if we didn't have any of the other metals, just 2.5 grams of gold over 11 meters is a good result. But at the bottom of that particular intercept, we had 2.5 meters of really, really high grade material, 2.8% copper, 3 grams gold, which is very, very good, 30 grams a ton of silver, which is excellent, and also zinc. And this is something we hadn't expected to get such high grades over so many different metals. On another target we had, Hillside, we actually had a bigger intercept, 16.6 meters, again with these very high grades. And what's meaningful is at the bottom where we got the high grades, the intercept was suddenly cut off by a fault. So what does that mean exactly? Well, this is a graphic we made to try and explain that. So here's the drill hole coming down from the surface, and then it goes through 11 meters of this mineralized material. At the bottom, it gets much more high grade, and then suddenly it hits a fault. And what that means is that the rest of the deposit has got kind of pushed off somewhere else. We don't know where, we don't know what, this gap is called a throw, so we don't know how far it's been thrown, but it has been thrown somewhere else. And so what that tells us is there's likely to be this same super high grade polymetallic material somewhere lurking around nearby. It might be a few hundred, 200 or 300 meters or 700 meters, we don't know. But in both those targets, that is what we're looking for, where the rest of this deposit has gone and where we can find more tonnage. The other thing we came across late last year, which we hadn't expected, is something called native copper. A native copper is copper that's kind of leached out of a deposit and it kind of formed into these kind of nuggets. And actually you can't really see it that well here, but we had copper smeared all over the drill bit. And this is on a third target, it's called Kin Valley. And what that tells us is that this copper has come from somewhere else, from another of our massive sulfide deposits. And so that's a third deposit that we're looking for. So the new drill campaign, if you've been following our announcements, the exploration campaign has commenced kind of recently. We're preparing areas for the diamond drill. And also we've started doing some more of these geophysics surveys, this AMT survey, gravity survey. So here are some of our internal kind of slides from our kind of planning. And we're drilling more percussion holes. So this is a satellite picture, obviously, of some of the holes we drilled, diamond holes we drilled last year. And then you can see more of these percussion holes we're drilling around, looking for this deposit that's moved away somewhere. Now, this time round, we're going to use a lot more science than we did before. So we're going to use the AMT survey. We've also started what's called a gravity survey, and this survey is another kind of high-tech approach whereby this measures the gravitational pull from the center of the Earth. And again, it's extremely sensitive. And as you move this kind of box around, the gravitational pull is going to be very, very slightly different from different locations. And that again tells you something about the kind of rocks that you've got underneath. And this is another really interesting technique. So these percussion holes we're drilling, we're going to drop a probe down here. And this hole may be like, perhaps 200 meters deep. And this probe is a bit like a kind of a radar or sonar, very simplistically, but it can kind of look, so to speak, perhaps 50 or 100 meters out from this hole and also beneath the hole. And going back to our current bun, if, for example, we drilled a hole here and, we're near this deposit, but we wouldn't see it. But with this downhole EM electromagnetic probe, that would pick up the deposit kind of nearby. And then we'll be diamond drilling. At the moment, I think the diamond drill's kind of looking like kind of late May. It may get pushed back slightly. We've had quite a lot of rain and a couple of other delays. So, sort of late May, early June, but not very far away, maybe kind of 6 weeks off from the diamond drill program. But there's going to be a lot of news coming out about these programs. AMT and Gravity are already underway, and the downhole electromagnetic program will probably start in about 3 weeks' time. So there's going to be a lot of news coming up on that. But the big news we had last year was the deal with Polymetal, which surprised the market. I don't think anybody knew it was coming, apart from us, obviously. It's a great deal for Chesterfield. So Polymetal is a real monster. It's a FTSE 100 mining company. Market cap's about £7 billion. It's one of the world's 10 largest gold mining companies. It's also the world's 5th largest silver company. Employs 11,600 people. It's a very, very big company. But it's, despite its name, it's not really polymetallic. It's just gold and silver. And their CEO came out again, actually just last month, and was saying that, like everybody, they've suddenly realized they need to get into copper. And this is something in the boardrooms of all the major mining companies and medium-sized mining companies. Everybody needs to get into copper. And what they decided was the way they wanted to get into copper was to get into copper exploration and to buy strategic stakes in copper exploration companies. And we were the first one that that they invested in. Chesterfield is the first public company Polymetal's ever invested in. They took a 23% stake. They put £2.1 million into us. One of the good things for us was that we're based in Cyprus, and that's where Polymetal has its HQ. And it's not just a kind of brass plate, it's where they actually have board meetings and stuff. So they're familiar with Cyprus and comfortable with it. And, you know, when they found that there was a copper exploration company active there, you know, with a kind of really top tier 1 geological team, that kind of made a lot of sense for them. They've since invested in, I think, 2 other copper exploration companies, but they're both in Russia, and they're both kind of private. So we're their kind of highest profile investment. What the other thing they said they liked about us, they thought we're very cheap, and they bought into us at 9p, it's roughly the price where it is now. And what they said is they felt they're getting in on the ground floor. I think because they see that copper and copper exploration in particular is going to be such a huge kind of growth area. The other thing that came along with the deal was Panmure Gordon. They actually introduced us to Polymetal, who is a client of theirs. Panmure is one of the big, very, very well-established brokers in London. We're by far their smallest client. So it was great for us to be picked up by Panmure as a client. And that gives us a lot of firepower in terms of raising money. Panmure is a purely institutional broker, and we hope over time to pick up some institutional investors in Chesterfield as part of our growth story. But we've now, in the last few months, attained 2 kind of great relationships with Poly and Panmure. And that really brings us on to, you know, the last part of this presentation, which is a search for new acquisitions. And, you know, going back to, you know, these big themes that everybody, I mean, all the mining companies are recognizing that they've got to get more copper exposure, but this is only going to pick up pace over the next kind of few years. And it's going to be a mad rush for exposure to copper exploration. And so therefore, we've taken the decision internally that we really, really want to pick up any good quality copper assets that we can now. This is kind of exploration ground, because we think these are all going to disappear very, very quickly. You know, maybe a year from now, there won't be anything left to buy. And that anybody who owns these kind of assets will attract attention from much larger mining companies wanting to joint venture with us. So there's something of a global copper land grab going on at the moment. We've got a lot of bandwidth in terms of our exploration team and also our kind of corporate team to pick up more assets and to complement our kind of initial asset in Cyprus. I think something that we've already demonstrated to the market was our ability to execute transactions, which we did with the Polymetal deal. We're very capable of getting these actually quite complicated deals. They seem to be simple when you read an announcement, but believe me, they're very complicated to do. But we have the experience in our company to get those done. And with Poly and also Panmure Gordon, we've got the financial firepower to do these kind of deals, which we didn't have a year ago. This is a chart of the rise of ESG investment, environmental, social government investing. These are ETF funds. There's been an absolute explosion of money available. So these ETFs went from really nothing, $2 or $3 billion late last year to over $20 billion by the end of January. So there's a wall of money looking for investments related to green energy, of which copper is the middle. And I think the thing about copper, is to bear in mind that there's only one conductor of electricity which is better than copper, and that's silver, which is obviously much more expensive. But they're really so copper is the commodity that's going to be powering this massive revolution in green energy. And obviously people investing in things like lithium and cobalt and nickel, etc. But the sort of new technologies will change, and the composition of batteries will change. But one thing that's always going to be right in the middle of it is copper. So there's a lot of money is going to be available for that. And we had I think this is our kind of new transactions team, if I can call it that. So on the sort of geological side, it's led by Neil, and so Neil was head of new business development, which is acquisitions really for Lundin Mining. Very, very successful growth story through acquisition. Dave, who's on the call, did that same sort of job for Rio Tinto. He was focused on Europe, trying to find acquisitions for Rio in Europe. My own background, I was an investment banker with Credit Lyonnais for a long time in Asia and China, and I also set up their securities operations in Latin America. And the Poly deal was really my deal, in the sense that I kind of pitched it and got it over the line and did all the kind of the detailed work on it. Since then, we've brought in a great new CFO, AJ, who's worked, he's a transaction specialist. He's worked for Morgan Stanley, Cazenove, Nomura, specialist in the mining space. Paul, who's on the call today, who's been in this kind of small cap growth company space for his entire career. And Peter Damouni, who's also on our board, a Canadian, was the guy that actually founded Chesterfield, and he was the guy that found the project in Cyprus. So amongst us all, we've got a lot of experience to look for new assets. We had we kicked this initiative off about a month or so ago, and we sat together in the first meeting and said, well, what would be the ideal kind of asset to find? What are we looking for? Of course, you're never going to find the ideal asset, but it would be in copper. It would be in a very good jurisdiction. It would be somewhere which is kind of on our time zone, or within maybe about a sort of 4 or 5 hour flying time from us. And we're looking for large, high quality land banks, which we think will grow in value tremendously over the next few years. We've set ourselves an ambitious target of trying to get something done within the next kind of few months, the first kind of new deal. We've looking at a lot of different projects right now. I've got a lot of irons in the fire, and one or two which are looking quite hopeful. And so, it's our ambition to, after the Poly deal, to spring another surprise on the market, with a major acquisition of a really good copper asset. And we'll hope to see what we can do in coming months. And the objective over, say, the next 12 to 16 months is to build Chesterfield into a diversified copper play. There are not that many copper plays, pure copper plays on the LSE. And we think, you know, our market cap now is about 10 million pounds. You know, we want to see ourselves as a 50 or 100 million pound company. That's our ambition. And we certainly think we've got the team to do that. We're going to have a big focus this year on communications. We've got a fairly active Twitter account for people that follow Twitter. We're going to do a number of these kind of Zoom webinars. People can ask questions. Podcasts. We did a podcast this last week with AJ and Paul. We're going to get a LinkedIn page going. In terms of news flow, we've already announced sort of the geophysics works. We'll have some more news on what we're finding with that. The downhole EM program I spoke about, we'll be announcing quite soon, probably probably at the end of this month or very early next month. Diamond drilling from late May through to August, assays kind of August, September. Hopefully some news on acquisitions. Cyprus is opening up very nicely, so we're hoping to get some site visits going June or July. So just a quick summary, why invest in Chesterfield? Well, we've got one of the best, we're very, very well positioned for this whole copper and kind of green revolution space. We've got a really, really top geological team, and now we've bolted on a top corporate team onto that. Exploration is already underway. You don't have to wait for that if you buy shares now. It's already happening. We're backed by Polymetal and Panmure, so we've got a lot of firepower behind us. And I just say, you know, we're ambitious. We've demonstrated that ambition with the Poly deal last year, and we are hoping to grow the company with, you know, twin avenues for success through exploration in Cyprus, and then also via new acquisitions. So that concludes the presentation. And so we can now move on to questions. So if anybody's got any questions, please type those in, and we'll do our best to answer those. While we're waiting for that, Paul, do you want to talk a little bit about the Goldman Sachs report? You're the one that alerted that to us, and
well, they're never left. Happy to. It's quite a striking report. They're projecting a 6-fold increase in demand for copper between now and 2030, and that's their base case. They're projecting that will take the price up to $15,000 a ton, up from where it is now, which is around $9,000 a ton. As they put it, they project this will be the strongest phase of copper growth in history. It's going to surpass, they think, what happened to copper in the early part of this century, when Chinese demand drove copper up, and we had that first bull market of the century in copper. So, I mean, you know, Goldman Sachs are never accused of understating things or getting behind the curve, and maybe they're overdoing it, but that is what they believe. It's really and it's actually well supported by what they discuss. And if anyone on the call actually wants to get a copy of that from me, I do happen to have one. Probably not meant to tell you that, but I do, and I can pass it on to you.
Sure, cool. Okay, I've got a question. Can you please review the disappointing reaction to the last draw results? The team were particularly disappointed and held a webinar to explain. Maybe worth emphasising the positive points from that, value per ton. So actually, I will bring up the. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a good question. I'm glad somebody's asked it. So this is Our share price chart over the last 12 months. So, and this is sort of the depths of COVID. The price fell to, I think, like 2p or something, and it had a very good sort of move up. And this is sort of, you know, gold. People became interested in us for our kind of exposure to gold, particularly, and general commodities. And then we did the Poly deal, and it shot up. Something else that is also kind of worth mentioning. We did a placing here, I think, at 5.25p. And I get pestered a lot by people saying, is there placing coming up? Because they think it's kind of just a stock. But actually, the shares kind of pretty much doubled. Well, they did double over 3 months from that, so 10p. And then we did another placing with the Poly deal at 9p, and that again doubled to 18p. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that placements are not always bad news for share prices. In our case, they both doubled, so they're kind of good news. Then I think there's probably a bit of an overreaction, to be honest, with the Poly deal. It was a great deal, but there was sort of, you know, a bit of selling, and the shares kind of settled down to around sort of, you know, 13, 14p. We did, unfortunately, we had a lot of delays, as I mentioned, waiting for the drill assay results, which weren't our fault, but we went through a bit of a quiet period news-wise because we just didn't have any news. And then we announced the results, and there was a big drop on the drill results. And so I'm glad somebody's asked about this, because, you know, we have a wide variety of shareholders. You know, we have a kind of lively following in the retail market, but we also have quite a few shareholders longer term who are people from the mining business, or other mining CEOs or geologists or specialist mining kind of investors. And when the results came out, we thought the results were good. And I got quite a few sort of text messages and emails from people I know well amongst our shareholders saying, great set of results, Martin, you know, well done. And I thought the share price would go up. And to my surprise, it went down quite precipitously. And I, you know, we don't really know why that was. I mean, there are a couple of people that put out slightly cynical comments saying, oh, well, they didn't think the intersections were very wide. Well, actually, they're not bad at all, but the grays were fantastic. I kind of suspect that there are quite a few sort of traders are in the stock and hoping there's going to be some huge bonanza kind of type of discovery or something. It was also about the time, for people who are familiar, there was this kind of IG margin core issue going on, that there was a big kind of change in margin requirements, which caused a lot of people to be forced sellers of a lot of stocks. And also we're coming up towards the end of the tax year. So I think a few traders kind of bailed out, and other people who perhaps didn't understand the results sold too. But I mean, from a kind of fundamental point of view and from a results point of view, there was no reason why the shares shouldn't have gone down. Should have gone down that far. So during this period, sort of over Christmas and what have you, we were hiring people. We were doing a lot of preparation work, and designing our works program. So again, we didn't have much news to put out because we were heads down. But from about this time, you know, we've started to get a lot more news out there. And actually, several of us, myself and Paul and a couple of other directors, bought shares down here because we just thought it was just very cheap. And now I think interest is coming back into the stock, and you know, I'm hoping for another good year for the stock. I mean, last year was a great return for shareholders who had faith in Chesterfield, and people who took part in the placings also did really, really well. And we're hopeful this is going to be another great year for us with strong copper prices, exploration, etc. So I hope that answers that question. I have another one from Adam Green, who's asking what, if any, is the level of further new fundraising envisaged for the next 12, 24 months? Another great question. Thank you for that, Adam. So we raised £2.5 million last, I think, early December. So we're very well funded for the current exploration program in Cyprus, and beyond. You know, as an exploration program company, you know, we will dip into the markets now and again to sort of top up our tanks. But I think you know, a lot of this sort of, you know, the new sort of view of kind of funding will probably be something to do with transactions. It would depend on what kind of transaction you do. Sometimes, you know, you can buy assets with shares, so you don't really need to raise any money. Sometimes you buy assets for cash, and then you'd probably raise money on the transaction. But I would expect and hope that further kind of you know, fundraising is related to deals and will be value positive. Here's another one. Are you looking for projects outside of Cyprus, or is Cyprus your focus? In addition, with new projects, do you feel that you have the manpower to develop the current additional projects and continue to generate value for shareholders? Appreciate your time today. Thank you for the question and the comment. Again, I'll take that one. Yes, I mean, we've got pretty much everything in Cyprus that we need, and we've bought and sort of sold actually licenses, but we've now got the suite of licenses that we think are optimal for our exploration program. We've got a lot of licenses, nearly 100 square kilometers, and so that's enough for us. So the focus for new projects is outside of Cyprus, and you know, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking for projects in good jurisdictions, projects which are sizable, good quality, and the kind of projects that we could actually hopefully attract major mining companies in to partner with us. In terms of manpower bandwidth, we've enlarged the team. So we've actually hired full-time 2 master's graduates from the Camborne School of Mines, George and Ryan, who are in Cyprus at the moment. They've actually been working for us kind of on a project basis for 2 years now. We've now taken them on full-time, and they're kind of more or less kind of running the project out in Cyprus. In terms of, we've certainly got the corporate bandwidth with the new people that we've hired, and the CFO and myself and Paul and others, and we've certainly got the geological bandwidth. And you know, if we you know, when and if we buy new exploration projects, Neil and Dave here will be designing the exploration programs, and you just go and hire people to do it. It's not that difficult. Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about that, the sort of bandwidth and the process of
certainly,
and, you know?
Yeah, certainly is. You know, you have to look at a lot of projects that come across the desk, and this is why we have quite a wide-ranging team involved, both with technical people and people with the background in finance and connections through the markets, and that way you can assess a lot of projects very quickly. And for us, I suppose the key thing is it's, you know, we are operating really within the UK time zone. Neil's in Toronto, so it's 5 hours away, and we can all talk to each other in real time, pretty much any time during the day. So, you know, in terms of latitude and longitude, I suppose we've got a reasonable scope of ground to look at. It'd be very difficult to say in New Zealand or something that's 12 hours away, I think, from the point of view of communicating quickly and running projects. But the other thing is the quality of jurisdiction. It's no good to have a great project in a country where there's a high risk of resource nationalism and something can be stolen from you, or the politics will work against you. And technically, I think there are 3 fundamental tenets that I've worked by for a very long time. And one is it relevant to what we do? And obviously we've chosen that in terms of copper and related metals. Second is the quality of the asset, which you can glibly call the size of the prize. And the third is the cost of the definitive test, what it's going to cost you to prove the concept and decide how far a small company can take the project, well, all the way to evaluation and even construction, or whether it's something that's going to be too big to bite, and you have to bring in more finance through a larger mining company, a partner. Either way, it's value enhancing for a company like Chesterfield. So those are the basic tenets under which we're using as a core sieve. And then of course we have to look at in a lot more detail at the data that's presented to us, how workable it is, and how easy it is to put a project together.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Dave. I've got another question which I'll direct to you as well. How far away are we from a commercial discovery in Cyprus? Question mark. Will it require, say, another 12 to 18 months of DD or kind of work, exploration work, or sooner? Dave, I think that's for you. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yes, it's an iterative process at the moment. We're going through a lot of geophysical work, and to encapsulate what Martin said earlier on, the important thing is that we're looking at different physical properties of the rocks to target and to vector. So we are planning to do some diamond drilling, which we hope will be a definitive test for us during this summer period, in this field season. And it depends how you define a commercial discovery. Certainly for us, it's something that we can see the signs or sight of tonnage and grade, where you can start to put a resource together, not necessarily define it totally and evaluate it. But commercial discovery, for me at least, is something which you can take to feasibility study. So it's a process of encouraging improved results and increasing the confidence in what you have, and building it up. But we certainly would expect and hope to see a sight of a commercial discovery within the next 12 months.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Thanks. So we don't see any more questions. So we've had how many people? 30 people on this webinar. So thank you very much for everybody that has attended. You know, by all means, contact the company if you have any questions. We'll be doing more of these webinars as we have kind of major news coming out, and we'll also be doing podcasts. If you don't already, please follow us on Twitter. Yes, hopefully you'll be hearing a lot more from us. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you, Paul and Dave as well. Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.